reason for Juneteenth is for celebration, excitement, happiness about being free. Being free, no longer bound. What did that mean to us as African Americans? That meant we were no longer considered slaves, property, owned by anybody. We were free men and women. But what did that mean in the world going forth? What did that mean in 1865 when they got the word? And not only did slaves get that word, but their slave owners got that word. What did that mean to Confederate soldiers that were also coming back home from a brutal battle, many times North and South, and they had to fight against family? What did that mean? That means now the cause that you were fighting for no longer was relevant. You had been defeated. And now you have individuals who literally were at your beck and call, have freedom, have rights, have equality. But that wasn't so. That was not so. As things went on and the celebrations went on in churches, it was very, very, very much rooted in church, praising God for freedom, for their children having a better life than they had. And that was something that was celebrated with such joy and such laughter. But then as things went on, and days turned into months, and months turned into years, and legislation began. Emancipation Proclamation gave the proclamation that we had no longer would have slavery. But the enforcement of that became muddy based on the understanding that African Americans were still less than their owners. And what that done historically was it took away some of the joy. We celebrated freedom, but we got segregation. We got Jim Crow laws. We got Klan killings in the nighttime. Fathers and mothers began to tell their children, don't make eye contact. Whatever you have to do, don't make an uproar, because they knew that if their child did, they may lose their child. So that was ingrained in us. We lost the celebration and began to have the drudgery of trying to live out that equality that the Emancipation Proclamation was supposed to give us. Now, fast forward until modern day. And how does that resonate with me? I'm 56 years old. As I stated, I was born and raised in Asheville. I went to the last segregated elementary school, and I was in the first grade. I witnessed young people walk out of school because they did not feel that they was equal and receiving equal treatment in the education system. To see that as a child was so, as they say, surreal. Because me and my brothers had to be taken home in a police car because we were bussed in from Rock Hill Road into Shiloh School. And all of my other friends walked home or was able to interact with the people, the teenagers that they knew that had congregated at Shiloh Elementary School. Once I got home, my family, my mom and dad said, don't you worry about that. That has nothing to do with you. And I always wondered, what do you mean that has nothing to do with me? If Juneteenth was an opportunity to celebrate freedom, and Brown versus Wade with the we need to have equal education. And here we are today. We're still talking about Black Lives Matter. We celebrated our Black lives and the freedom with Juneteenth. But we're now protesting and marching in the street because we still have that mind, have the sense that we can't get the liberty and justice that our Constitution brought to us. And I always go back to those words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All life matter. But it's time to think about tearing down those thought processes, those ingrained things, those things that we don't readily know that take away from that true essence of being free. That's a personal thing. We all have to come to a point in our lives when we ask ourselves, what do I really believe? What do I think? How is my life affecting the life of brown and Black individuals in America? That's what I think about when I think about Juneteenth. I think about the fact that we have to tear down to build up. The foundation was very much exciting because it ended slavery. But because of our individual views, we were still enslaved. Enslaved economically, socially, religiously, separate but equal. I want to celebrate the fact that children, the next generation, will know real freedom. They will celebrate. Juneteenth will not just be a day that comes in history, but that it will be celebrated among all men and women. Because equality is not just for one. All life matter. And we can all celebrate together. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this time to say, as a 56-year-old Black female with 2 sons, 5 grandsons, that is no longer hands up. Thank you.
I'm Annette Coleman, and I'm a native of this area. I was born in Leicester, North Carolina. And the thing that I wanted to say this morning was June 19th could not be coming at a more fitting time. And for me, it's an opportunity to reflect on our history of brave Black women and men who suffered under slavery and fought so hard for our freedoms and our equities that we have now. Over 150 years later, we are still struggling with issues of racism and injustice. We did a little of that from 60 to 65 here in Asheville. You all may have heard about ASCORE, Asheville Student Committee on Racial Equality, but we thought perhaps that might be the end of some of the racism and injustices that we see now, but it just put a Band-Aid on, and here we are again. The current situation has forced us to once again confront the long history of injustice, and it is critical that we stand together, speak out, and do everything in our power to eradicate this bad behavior.
My name is Bobette Kilgore-Mays. I was raised in Asheville, North Carolina, originally from Stumptown, but moved to Shiloh, raised my kids in Shiloh. As I think about Juneteenth, I think about growing up in elementary, junior high, and high school. I never knew about Juneteenth. Never, it was nothing that we were taught in school. I did not know about it till I went to a historically black college. That's when it started to be resonated. The celebration is great, but we never celebrated growing up because we didn't really know anything about it. It was so far stretched from down in Texas. The thing that I gathered from that is from 1863 to, it was 2 years after that the people in Texas found out that they were free, because they really didn't realize that they were free. And it kind of made me think of possibly it was because they were uneducated, so they didn't read. They didn't read newspapers. There was no television, so therefore I don't think that they were privy to that type of information. A sense of freedom to me for them at that time was the fact that they no longer had to carry paper. They could learn how to own their own property, sell their own goods, and that's when the sharecropping came in. But the loss was they didn't gain that much. But they had a place to stay. They could feed their kids. They were able to, let their kids get some schooling. So that was what I got out of Juneteenth. And then I know a lot of people laugh and talk about, well, our culture, we eat fried chicken, potato salad, watermelon, apple pie, and peach pie, but that's part of that celebration of Juneteenth that day. And that was because most of that stuff was grown right there on the property, and it was easy for them to fix. So it made a difference to them. So as we celebrate, I know my daughter lives in Maryland, and she's going to celebrate on Sunday. And as I realized, I started researching about Juneteenth, it stretched out past the United States, because some other slaves were freed. Brazil, some of the, my daughter's going to do a Jamaican type thing for Juneteenth. But I still become saddened because I look at today's context of what's going on, and I really feel like that we're going backwards instead of forward, because we're coming to a point where that same kind of environment of being afraid, because I have a son, and he's 37. And why would a 37-year-old that had the best education, went to college, married, has land, because I made sure we'd have property, but he still knows that when he goes out, it doesn't matter. If he goes out and he gets stopped, it doesn't matter where he went to school, unless it was one of his classmates that's a police officer. So that fear factor. So I'm wondering if maybe even though they were free, were they really free? They just didn't have to carry papers, but were they really free to be an equal? So because if you look as past that 1865, in the 1900s, they were still dehumanized. They were still unable to get jobs and make money and, send their kids to college. It was just the dynamics. And as we go up for years to come now, where have we stepped back? Where we still have men that can't feed their families. They can't get decent jobs. They go out, if they have any kind of trouble, they become stereotyped. So as we celebrate Juneteenth, I love to keep it in a positive perspective, because I have seen the changes from the 50s, the 60s, and now the 70s. Because when I was in the early 70s, it was kind of unusual for a black person to go to an all-white college. You know, we didn't have that many options. We had some, but you had to be so exceptional to even get accepted in. So things have changed. We have moved forward, but right now I feel like we're kind of at a place where we're still just, we're not growing anymore. So I will celebrate Juneteenth. My family, my daughter will celebrate on Sunday. I've listened to the stories that my grandfather, who was born and raised in South Carolina, and he was the child of the plantation owner. And with the way that he talked about, he probably got a lot of more benefits than some of the others because he was granted land and his father, you know, took care of them because there was 10 of them. My mom, it was 10 of them. So he would come and take care of them and buy them stuff and do things. But he always talked about the struggles when he was young. And then my aunt, she was the only one of the 10 that would tell me about what the experience was like growing up in that type of an atmosphere, being different. So I celebrate the fact that we've come a long way, and I try to tell my children that even though you think it's hard, it was harder back then than it is today. So we have come, so we will, this is a reason to celebrate.
My name is Brandon Mays. I'm originally from Inglewood, California, but I've been here in Asheville the majority of my life, so I call Asheville, North Carolina home. As far as Juneteenth goes, I had to do some research on it. Not really aware of it coming up. Elementary school through middle school in the history books, history lessons, as far as the celebration of it. I had a teammate at Furman University. He's from Galveston, Texas, where the Juneteenth came about, and he didn't really say much about it. I know that it's more celebrated there. And as far as the observance of a holiday, I just think it took a backseat to Independence Day. So now with the movements you have coming up, you know, people are debating, especially with the Black Lives Matter, you know, should we put more emphasis on Juneteenth for us, considering the freedom associated with it as opposed to July the 4th. So you have that going on. And when I was thinking about it, researching and everything, just the Emancipation Proclamation coming about January the 1st, and we had a church service. I remember the lady was saying, you know, we have to dress up because we're bringing in a new year and we're talking about freedom celebration and everything. And, you know, I looked at that and I'm thinking about, from the commercial standpoint, that, you know, New Year's Eve and New Year's kind of overtook the Emancipation Proclamation, kind of the same way that July the 4th is taking the Juneteenth celebration. But it really isn't celebrated as much as it used to. I understand, you know, decades after 1865, June 19th, that there were celebrations that occurred mainly throughout Texas and the African American community especially. That was met with some resistance, and when the Depression came about, I understood that many of the workers had to go into the city, so where the celebrations were held in the rural areas, they had to just go away from that, and then, you know, unless it was on a weekend, they weren't really allowed to celebrate it. So it kind of, you know, diminished from there, picked back up in the civil rights movement. I remember my father talking about it briefly, you know, dealing with that and just remembering the ancestors and pretty much the idea behind it whenever we did have the celebration coming from it, you know, it was just working on self-reflection and prayer, community, coming together, and just remembering the freedom that came with it. And, you know, I'm looking at it now and dealing with what we have currently in America. It's just going back to the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, how freedom came about, but it wasn't given to all, considering that the Confederate States withheld from it. And then when you have Juneteenth come about in 1865 on June the 19th, it came about, but still, what did it mean to be completely free? And you know, you're just dealing with land ownership and you know, the ability to have the equal rights to property as well as equal rights as citizens. And so just when you look at the evolution of African Americans, the status within the United States, going from 3/5 of a person, and then going to the Emancipation Proclamation, and then Juneteenth becoming 100% free, but still seen as a second-class citizen, and we're still in a state like that. So it's just, Juneteenth is a reminder of policy being in place to liberate all of the African Americans, throughout the United States, and still, the freedoms that we're supposed to have that are just kind of withheld from us. So that's what I think about when I think about Juneteenth. And like I said, I didn't really know much about it coming up in school. I mean, it was always overshadowed by the Emancipation Proclamation. That took most of the weight, and the way that I understood it growing up was that's when slaves were freed 100% throughout the country, but that's not the case, and that's what I'm learning from Juneteenth. And celebrations, I think, will come back. It takes big movements to bring it in, just like the Civil Rights brought it back in the 50s and 60s. And so maybe one day we'll have it as a national holiday celebrated throughout the United States.
My name is Dee Williams, and I'm a native Ashevillean, and I'm glad to be here to talk about Juneteenth. So Juneteenth, as far as I remember, as it was told to me before I could do research, was told to me by my grandmother. My grandmother was originally from Clinton, South Carolina. And she came to Asheville, of course, migrated here for a job. But before she left, they, of course, would celebrate Juneteenth. She knew about it, and it was celebrated very sporadically, but she raised my brother and me, and she would kind of give us a sense of what it was, and she would say to me that it was about the slaves being freed, and her mother, who was my great-grandmother, had told her about it, and my great-grandmother was a Creole lady from New Orleans, so she had been kind of more exposed to it than my grandmother did. Juneteenth is a holiday that's celebrated like Independence Day, that's celebrated on July 4th. The only thing is that Juneteenth is celebrated on June 19th. And what it actually does is combine the word June with the 19th, so hence Juneteenth. Juneteenth celebrated emancipation, but it was almost 2.5 years later than the real emancipation. Slaves were freed on January 1, 1863, but what had happened was that in Galveston, Texas, this is some research that I picked up later on, because it was kind of, because it was celebrated so sporadically. I know here when I was growing up, and not at all really, but according to my grandmother, and I'll talk a little bit about why it was celebrated so sporadically. But going back to why it was so late, various theories about it. Of course, where it's focused on is Galveston, Texas. And Texas, is, of course, is a huge state. Communications may have been a problem. A gentleman named Gordon Granger, he was a general. He happened to arrive and read the edict that declared all men and women manumitted or free from slavery who were Negroes. And it was read in Galveston, Texas. And at the time that it was read, even though it was 2.5 years later after the emancipation, my grandmother and my great-grandmother had told her that there was something called the scatter. In other words, when freed slaves, when they were freed and they heard the general reading the emancipation, or the Juneteenth, the Freedom Declaration on June 19, 1865, she said that there was something called the scatter. And the scatter happened because some slaves who were newly freed and heard the emancipation or the Juneteenth reading being done, immediately left from where they were and scattered to go find relatives that were located in other states and other cities. And a lot of them just wanted to get away from the people who owned them. There was also a theory, she said, that my great-grandmother from New Orleans told her, is that they deliberately delayed the announcement to try to get free labor, the cotton crop in or whatever. and so it was delayed. And then she also said that a lot of people, some of them chose to stay and not scatter. They were to work for wages, and she also said that a lot of people stayed because it was suggested that they stay in place and work where they work for wages. But I wonder why it was never celebrated. At least when I was growing up here in Asheville, very limited celebrations. And my grandmother said it was because during segregation, of course, a lot of black people could not, because of Jim Crow and segregation, couldn't use public facilities to, like a park or anything like that. So it was kind of relegated to community shelter or small parts of the community and kind of sporadic. So it couldn't be just a huge, big public celebration. I think in Houston, a group of slaves got together, collected $800, and they bought a park. And this was one of the first biggest celebrations of Juneteenth in the country. Also, my grandmother told me that after that, with Jim Crow and segregation and then the civil rights movement, that sort of disturbed the celebration of Juneteenth even further. But, I mean, because everybody's focus was on civil rights and all of that, and not a whole lot on the celebration of freedom, because it was, you know, so much oppression going on. But at any rate, it's just to commemorate, and a lot of people are renewing that all over the country. They're celebrating the emancipation of American freed slaves with Juneteenth, and I believe there's a celebration, a small one that's in a community here in Asheville that's recently started in the Hillcrest community. They're doing one, but I think that's the only one that may be on a large public scale here in Asheville. There are others around the country that are bigger, but when I asked my grandmother about it, why it wasn't celebrated, she said it was because there was so much oppression and a lot of people thought we didn't have anything to celebrate. But here lately, before the pandemic, of course, there were public celebrations. So that's what I know about Juneteenth in Asheville, North Carolina.
Hi, I'm DK Wesley, Assistant County Manager here in Buncombe County. I want to take this time to wish you all a very happy Juneteenth. June 19th has always been a day that my family and friends have celebrated. We celebrate liberty, we celebrate freedom. We also celebrate the rich culture that we have here as descendants of Africans in the United States. So on this weekend, I hope you take the time to celebrate your family, to think about how far we've come, but acknowledge that there's much, much, much more work to be done here. Happy Juneteenth.
Juneteenth for me means a couple of things. It means that it brings back childhood memories of being in the park with my parents, barbecuing and celebrating with a whole bunch of people who have migrated to California from Texas and Mississippi. My mother was from Galveston, where Juneteenth originated. Later on, I figured out that it was like a second Independence Day for us. I had Juneteenth and I had the 4th of July. It was like being doubly blessed. And later, as an adult, I kind of put it together that it matched my two-ness. As an African and African American, I got Juneteenth as well as the 4th of July to celebrate independence and freedom. And I figured that on the positive side, I was doubly blessed to have both. I'm independent and free as an African American. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Roy Harris, and I am a 37-year resident of Asheville. Been here since 1983. And I think the whole time that I've lived in Asheville, I've lived in the city limits. Where I live at now, I've been there for 33 years, the house. And is in what we call the South Side. And the South Side is basically, it's not Biltmore South Side. It is the South Side that there was a street that came through the neighborhood that before urban renewal called the South Side Avenue. It basically went from Biltmore Avenue all the way down to Depot Street, which is going towards the river. But for some reason, the city rolled the street up. And so when they rolled the street up, it was part of, if you think the south side is just between Biltmore Avenue and Cox Avenue, you know, it went all the way down to Depot Street. And so I live in that neighborhood, which is called the South Side neighborhood. But it's being gentrified. And as it's being gentrified, the character, people still live there, all kinds of people. And most of the homes are filled with folks, and so we don't have a lot of homes that are just sitting around with nobody living in them. So people have moved in. And sometimes I give the example is that on my block, where my house is, on Bartlett Street, there's 14 homes in that particular block. And when I moved there in 87, those 14 homes were matriarchal, sort of run. All of them were African American. I knew everybody on the block, at least something about them. I knew the names or whatever, and the goings and comings of them. And so, of those 14 homes, I think there's been no new home built on that block. One burned down maybe 25 years ago, but only 5 of them are now African American owned, or African American stay in those homes. And of those 5, I think three of us have been there almost more than 30 years. So every time someone moves out, another family moves in, and so it's changed over the years. I made it an effort in the last, during this pandemic thing, I made an effort to say, I'm gonna learn everybody, at least speak to them, say something to them, everybody on the block. And so I did, and got to know them. Just on a first name basis, maybe on a cross the fence basis. Now I did meet one across the fence. They looked at me like, will you hurry up and finish this conversation? I really don't care who you are. And I got that feeling. I'm like, okay. So when a U-Haul truck back up to your house and start picking up your furniture, I'm just gonna say, oh, they're moving. But that's the way it is. But it's the pandemic that we've gone through has helped to bring a lot of neighborhoods together. At least know who your neighbors are, and in turn, get to know them. Even though it's changed over in a lot of neighborhoods, get to know them and who they are and everything. Juneteenth. Who would have ever thunk that 155 years later, I would be worried about my 15-month-old granddaughter and what she has to face. I mean, I watched a PBS series the other day which talked about the criminalization of black girls and how the prison system is growing and they're building women prison. I'm like, you mean I can't go to the house and just sit and do nothing because she's going to be facing this system? Luckily, she's going to have 2 parents at home. She's going to have all the advantage it takes for her to survive and scribe and whatever. But then I was thinking, she's the exception. What about all those other young black girls out there that the system is not ready for? The system is not going to be their friends. And not only that, sometimes we want to blame it all on the public school system, but not only the public school system, but the whole, everything about it. We got to think about that, and how do we interact with that? And it's personal to me because I have 2 granddaughters. One's 24 years of age, and then one that's 15 months. And so, but I'm thinking they both are in this thing, and they're having to fight this world and what goes on in it. Juneteenth. It's been a neglected holiday, somewhat, because people have not. It's almost too close to 4th of July, and so people want to celebrate on 4th of July, and so they forget about Juneteenth. But I was hoped to think that when the plantation owner came out on the front porch back then in 1863. Or 1865 in case of the slaves in Texas, that when he came out and he said, I can no longer keep you here. You're free to go. I'm thinking that my grandfather, great-great-grandfather was standing there. And when the plantation owner maybe finished his speech and everything, he did a couple of things. Number one, he looked down at his feet and he said, I got some shoes on. I got some pants on, I got a shirt on, and I got a jacket and a hat. And once that speech was over with, I guess he says, I'll see y'all, bye. But the first step that he had to take, you can imagine, he had to start thinking, where am I going to eat? What am I going to do? Where am I going to live? Where am I going to sleep tonight? Where's my family? Where's all of, do I start, if they split us up back then, can I find them? Do I know where they took my wife and children? Or do they know where they took my mother and father and everything? Do I start looking for them? And I would hope that my great-great-grandfather would have been in one of those groups, and I would think that maybe one of the reasons that I am sitting here today doing this is because of him. That he started this advocacy thing and this activism thing in me that says, okay, let's go. See y'all later. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but I know I'm going to take the first step. And then the second step, he probably had to decide, well, which direction am I going? Am I going north, south, east, or west? And one of the favorite scenes in one of the movies is Django, when he, after all that commotion had gone on, and then the guy got on his horse, he says, that away is north. And he told the slaves at that time, he says, y'all got a decision to make. You can either go north, or you can go back in town. And if you go back in town, you're going to have to put up with whatever, all that's going to go with it, but you might want to go north. And then he rode off, it was like, and they stood there like, okay, what do we do next? Oh, bury the horse, bury everybody else, and we headed north. In other words, we're not going back south, because they knew what was waiting for them there. And Juneteenth, all these years later, and now we're facing a pandemic, we're facing protests. And then someone reminded me the other day, they said, you from the coast of North Carolina, right? He said, oh, hurricanes. So how you gonna put all those together? And how you gonna do, because some town or some city is gonna be faced with those three within the next month or the next couple of months. Pandemic, protests, hurricanes. How you gonna handle it? What do you do? Oh, it's gonna expose, the pandemic exposed a lot of our poor folks. All of a sudden, we realize, oh, poor folks are the ones that really get exposed and everything. Oh, then we'll send them a stimulus check. Oh, we'll send them we'll up their unemployment benefits. I'm like, why didn't you do that before? And now you're gonna get them in some false sense of security. And then some of them are going to have to make a decision. Do I want to go back to work with all of this going around? 155 years later, you think that somebody's still having to make those hard decisions after Juneteenth. It's still there. We still have to face it. We still have to deal with it. Say you can go now. So what does all this got to do with Asheville? Oh yeah, it's got a lot to do with Asheville. Look at who was affected by this the most, this pandemic and all of that. Asheville is a tourist city. Lots of hotels. In fact, I went by one day and I'm like, when did that hotel go up? And I'm like, oh, there it is. Because I had been out that way the last year or so. And there's a hotel. Who works in them? Poor folks. All of the people. A lot of the, what do they call it now? They got a fancy term for it. The environmental staff. Which means the what? The custodians, the people that do the rooms and everything, the people that work in the kitchen, they're called the environmental staff or something now. If that hotel don't survive, they will be the biggest one. Everybody above them will be able to say, okay, I'm out of here. See y'all later. I'm I'm going to another town, another city, and get another job similar to this. They can't. A lot of them can't do that. So as we go forward, why do you ask me that question? Why? Why is Juneteenth important in 2020? Because some of the same is still going on right now. And I may not have affected me, but it affects me too. I don't care what level you're at. A lot of this stuff still affects somebody. I'm reminded of maybe when Juneteenth happened here, Mrs. Patton was upset about who's gonna cook dinner that night. After the Union soldiers came through, and the black says, "Okay, I'm out of here. See y'all later." Followed the Union soldiers out of town. There's a story that she was saying, and looked around and said, "Well, what are we gonna do tomorrow? Who's gonna cook, or who's gonna fix? Who's gonna take care of us? Who's gonna do all of those kinds of things? I don't know. You have to figure it out, but we gone." And then somebody said she was really upset when they took her best carriage. They took her best carriage. And can you imagine? They were probably hanging off the side of it. They already knew which was the strongest mule or horse to pull that carriage. They already had all that figured out. And they were like, "We'll see you later. We out of here. We got your best. We might send it back to you." But right now, we headed out of town, and I'm sorry, but we know that this is the best one. We're gonna take the strongest horses to pull it. And, oh, by the way, we've had some supplies already stored away for this day. And so we out of here, we leaving town, and we going somewhere else. And could you imagine the discussion between them a quarter of a mile down the road? What are we gonna do? Where do we go? The Union soldiers, are y'all with us? Are y'all against us? And as they went on. Of course, as you can see, there's even in Asheville, North Carolina today, do you see that? I'm thinking that the population of Asheville African Americans may have been in the high 20s at one time, but it's now, when the 2020 census come out, it may be under 10, maybe somewhere 8. But then you look at the whole Western North Carolina, says 10% in Asheville City, then it may be 5% in Buncombe County, but only 2% in whole, what we call Western North Carolina. And so it's almost like we're being diluted, until we may even start to question, why are we here? Why do we stay here? Because the numbers are such diluted. What does it mean? It's gonna mean a lot. Oh, somebody's already studied it. Pretty much bet you on that. Somebody's already studied it. What does this really mean? We shall see. Juneteenth, 2020. I hope it's celebrated all over. I saw something the other day where someone says on July the 4th this year that African Americans or people of color wear black. And I'm like, yep, I think this is what I'm gonna do. I got, no problem, just go in my closet, there's some black stuff in there, so maybe that day I will wear black. In fact, I know that's what I'm gonna do. And celebrations are happening now, and I hope this helps to highlight this holiday, or highlight this celebration day. And we can see that it's even on the national level. We can see that our president had to rethink his plans because of that. It was almost like, did he even consider it? Oh, did he even consider Tulsa, what happened in Tulsa, the massacre? Did he even consider it? And now he's saying, oh yeah, okay, we'll change that day. I guess that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you.